So JFirst Hockey just did a very interesting fan vote where fans had the opportunity to compare NHL players against each other to determine perceived to be the best forward in the NHL. Coincidentally, I'm working on a project to rank all of the team's forward lines, and as a result, I've been going through a lot of the data around the NHL forwards, so I thought I would do something a little bit different and react to the fan vote, comparing that vote to the analytic that I've been charting, and see which players the fans rated correctly or rated too high and too low. I'm going to go through it quick. I haven't seen any of this fan vote, so it's just going to be a rapid-fire style video, but I will be referencing a lot of stats from Hockey Reference, so I'll drop a link to that down in the description if you want to dig into these stats a little bit more on your own. So NHL fans rated Connor McDavid as the best player in the NHL, which, no surprise, that's correct. McDavid is the best player of the current generation, probably since the lockout. It's either him or Ovechkin in my opinion, but right now he's in his prime, he's absolutely dominant, and nobody can really touch him. Fans had Nathan MacKinnon at number 2, and I actually think this is a little bit high. MacKinnon is one of the best centers in the NHL, no doubt about it, but he doesn't quite crack the top 3 in terms of productivity over the last few years. I'd actually have him down at number 5, but the number 3 player on this list, Leon Draisaitl, should be in the number 2 position, and it's actually incredible that the Oilers legitimately have the 2 best forwards in the world and have still not managed to make it to the Stanley Cup Finals. I hope that changes soon, but it's really wild that nobody is giving McDavid and Draisaitl shit for not getting that deep in the playoffs. Number 4 is Austin Matthews, who I would have at number 3, so this is about an appropriate ranking, behind McDavid and Draisaitl, but ahead of McKinnon in my grading. And then after him, Florida's Matthew Tkachuk, a few spots higher than I would have him rated. I'd have him 7th overall, but the fans not egregiously overrating Matthew Tkachuk by any means. David Pastrnak in the 6th spot, that is correct. That's where my charting and analytics have him over the last few years. But then we get Sidney Crosby at number 7, the first major mistake by the fans. Crosby is not a top 10 forward in the NHL, and he has not been for the past few years. Over the last 3 years, his point share, according to Hockey Reference, would place him number 5 among centers. So really, putting Crosby in the top 10 is just because of name brand recognition and really not at all warranted by his productivity. And Crosby is followed in the fan ranking by Jack Hughes, who is another player who I think is a little bit overrated, maybe even more so than Crosby, because at least Crosby has the history of high levels of productivity. Hughes really only has one level of elite production, and while sure he's young and the expectation is that he'll continue to improve and grow, that's definitely not a given. Hughes would not be in my top 20 purely because I am looking for more consistency in terms of productivity. If he can string together more seasons like he did last year, for sure he's a top 10 player, but I just don't have the track record to confidently say, yeah, he's a top 20 player in the NHL right now. Now after him is Mikko Rantanen, a player who should actually be in the top 5. His productivity over the last 3 years has been incredible. He has actually been, by my charting, the best wing of the last 3 years, better than Pastrnak, better than Kucherov, better than Tkachuk or Marner or Ovechkin. He has been absolutely incredible, but he gets overshadowed by Nathan MacKinnon. Kucherov at 10, that's about where I would put him as well, so no problem there. Give Jason Robertson at 11, in my opinion, he should be a top 10 player on this list, one of the best young wings in the NHL. Kirill Kaprizov at 12 is a little bit lower than I would have him rated. I have him in the top 10, but not egregiously off base. NHL, and he has the productivity track record to back it up. Mitch Marner is 13th on the fans list, he's 11th on mine, so not too much of a disparity there. Elias Pettersson at 14 is similar to Jack Hughes. He has 1 year of elite productivity and 1 year of very good productivity, but that's it. Again, I need to see a little bit more of him before I'm putting him in the top 20 skaters. To me, I'd have him down around 30, but if he has one more good year, I think he's definitely in the conversation for top 20. Brayden Point being at number 15 on this list is, in my opinion, just laughable. He is barely a top 10 center in the NHL based on his past production, and he's also had the benefit of getting to play with Steven Stamkos. In the early to mid-20s, I could see the argument, but definitely not in the top 15. Alexander Barkov, I had him at number 18, and he's at 16 on the fan vote, right around the right area. Then we have Jack Eichel, who might be the most egregiously overrated player on this list. I know he just won the Stanley Cup and shoved it in Buffalo's face, and he played very well in that time, but he has exactly 1 year of above average, not great, not elite, above average productivity following 2 years of just horrendous productivity in Buffalo. Jack Eichel in the top 20, even if you're going off of just last year, you're ignoring how he was good but not great in Buffalo. You're just going off of last year. In Vegas, nowhere near the top 20. This is an absolute overrating by the fans. Tage Thompson at 18, similar story to Hughes and Pettersson. Good player, elite productivity last year. Probably going to be in the top 20, but just doesn't have the history to back it up, so I can't put him in the top 20 yet. I'd have him down in the late 30s. At 19, we have Sebastian Aho. That's about right. I had him at 20. Mark Stone at 20 is laughable. He's barely in the top 50 based on my charting. Again, I know Vegas just won the Cup and there's a sexy pick in everybody's mind, but that doesn't mean that we should be ignoring the last few years where Mark Stone put a productivity that was good for a second liner, but not elite and not top 25. Roope Hintz at 21 is about dead on. I had him at 23. Brad Marchand getting getting criminally underrated by being put outside of the top 20. He was easily top 15 for me, consistently a way more productive player than Stone or Eichel. And then Alex Ovechkin at 23, absolutely ridiculous. He is still a top 20 forward, consistently still high to elite offensive output. I had him at 19th on my ranking. He should absolutely be inside the top 20. Tim Stützle at 24, that's a no for me, dog. Again, 1 year elite productivity is not really enough to go on to put him in the top 25, in my opinion. Stamkos at 25, just like Ovechkin, absolutely absurd to not have him in the top 20. He is number 17 on my list, still an absolutely elite player. Artemi Panarin, also too low. Outside of the top 25, he is easily top 20. I had him at 16th. Incredibly skilled player, incredibly productive in terms of his scoring. Best Rangers forward. Not putting him in the top 20 is ridiculous. Brady Tkachuk, in my opinion, higher than Tim Stützle, should be in the top 40, but definitely not in the top 30. It makes sense that fans would put Stützle higher than Tkachuk, given that he outproduced Brady last season, and recency bias is a very real thing. But over the last few years, Brady Tkachuk has been a consistently productive player, and I'm taking that history over the hope that Tim Stützle is able to replicate his elite play from last season, at least until Stützle is able to string together a few of those seasons. William Nylander at 28th is about where I would put him. Nico Hischier at 29th. Great year last year, but the year before that, he was very down. Longer track record than some of those younger guys, but he just hasn't been able to do it consistently, which is again what I'm looking at. Svechnikov at 30, way too high. He's been more consistent, but just hasn't had those elite peaks that some of the other guys have. I put him inside the top 40, but not the top 30. Johnny Gaudreau at 31, though, is the most egregious underrating of a player. He should easily be inside the top 20. This guy has been incredibly productive on some bad teams. Andrei Kopitar, again, name recognition, doing a lot of work. He's a top 50 player, but not a top 35. Kyle Connor, a little bit underrated in my opinion. He should be in the top 25. He's at 33 here. Timo Meier at 34, slightly overrated. He should be about 10 spots lower in my opinion. Mulligan at 35, again, name recognition, doing a lot of work here. He should not even be on this list, not in the top 65. His play of late has been really bad by his standards, but you know who's not bad? Mika Zibanejad at 36 should be in the top 20. This guy's incredibly strong second act to Panarin. Kevin Fiala, very solid producer, but not in the top 40. He should be barely in the top 60. Ditto for Dylan Larkin, who should actually be further down around 70 and maybe not even in the top 64. Good player, like him a lot, but not this high. Matt Barzal at 39, I was actually really surprised. I thought he was much more productive, but digging into the analytics, this guy is not a top 65 forward. He was actually majorly outclassed by his new teammate Bo Horvat, who's at 64th. Jonathan Huberdeau at number 40. People must have just stopped watching Flames games because Huberdeau was easily a top 25 forward, incredibly productive last year, and has a very high floor. Then Joe Pavelski at 41. I will hear no disrespect to my king, Pavelski. Leave it out right here. Not putting him in the top 25 is ridiculous. Jonathan Marchessault at 42. That's about where I would rate him, so good job by the fans here. But then underrating John Tavares, who's a top 35 winger. He is still incredibly productive, a great leader for the Maple Leafs. Don't know why everybody thinks that he's just some washed player. He's still an incredibly productive forward. Clayton Keller rated about properly. He hasn't had quite the elite production, but he's had very high production last year. Hope he continues to reach that point and he eventually gets out of Arizona and gets to show his potential on a real team. Alex DeBrincat at number 45, and people are underestimating how good a deal this was for Detroit. A borderline top 30 player, really productive and young. We do this again next year, he could be close to the top 20. Also ridiculous that we're putting Jake Gensel outside of the top 25. He should be easily 20 spots higher, an incredibly efficient goal scorer who probably helps Crosby a lot more than people give him credit for. Then we got two Jets, Nikolai Ehlers and Mark Scheifele. Scheifele should be about 10 spots higher. Meanwhile, Ehlers should be about 10 spots lower. Philip Forsberg rated appropriately, plus or minus a few spots, not a big deal. Alex Tuch at 50, a bit high for my taste. Barely top 64 player, should not be at 50. Claude Giroux, a bit low for my taste, should be closer to 40 than 50. Patrick Laine at number 52. Baffling to me. Everybody just seems to think this guy's already hit his potential, and he has not. I mean, he hasn't even had sustained great productivity. We're putting him in the top 52. He shouldn't even be in the top 100, to be honest. Elias Lindholm at 53, way underrated. Top 30 player for sure. Incredibly productive. Again, people just must have forgotten that the Calgary Flames existed when they were doing this voting because they were underrating Huberdeau and Lindholm drastically. Jesper Bratt, appropriately rated at 54. Chris Kreider down here at 55 should be 20 spots higher than that. Like, did everybody forget that this guy scored 50 goals 2 years ago? At 56, look, I love Trevor Zegras. I think he's one of the most fun players in the NHL, but he has just not produced enough to put himself in the top 100 forwards, let alone the top 64. The new Ryan Nugent-Hopkins at 57 is about 15 spots too low. Martin Necas at 58 is about 10 spots too high for my taste. Tomas Hertl at 59, that's about right. honestly, how are people still sleeping on Carter Verhaeghe, putting him down at 60? This guy is a top 45 forward. He rips people's hearts out in the playoffs. Absolutely ridiculous in him to be this low. Pierre-Luc Dubois comes in at 61, and my hot take of the summer is that his contract was one of the worst that was given out. This guy's a top 90 forward, not top 65. Connor Bedard at 62 is fine, I guess. I think it's just funny that people are putting a lot of stock into 1 or 2 seasons for guys like Stützle or Tage Thompson, but they're not going to put one of the generational talents inside of the top 60. Pavel Buchnevich at 63, an abomination. He should be 30 spots higher, a top 30 player if I've ever seen one. And then finally, Bo Horvat at 64. As I mentioned earlier, I'd put him a little bit higher, but not really that much. I'd put him inside the top 60, but this is an egregiously low ranking. And I'll close this out by giving a few guys not on the list who I think should have been on the list. Number 1 being TJ Miller of the Vancouver Canucks. I know he's a controversial figure, but he's still a very productive player, and he's done so being on a very bad team. Islanders center Brock Nelson is another one who should be on this list. He is maybe the best second-line center in the entire league and a very strong two-way player. One of the most underrated signings for one of my favorite teams, the New Jersey Devils, Tyler Toffoli, is absolutely a top 50 player and should be on this list. And then finally, Florida Panthers winger Sam Reinhart, who has, no surprise, become a massive impact player since he got freed from Buffalo. But let me know who you think is rated too high or too low on this list, and who you think I'm absolutely wrong about, and keep an eye out in the future for those videos where I'm going to be ranking every single team's lines and defensive pairings.